Have you ever met a hooker? Yes, that's a loaded question, and maybe that's exactly why I want to ask it. Because in this podcast, you're going to meet a hooker. Elizabeth Masters is a beautiful, sophisticated, high-end escort whose clients include wealthy executives, entrepreneurs, and some extraordinarily successful men. Men who can afford almost anything. And they sometimes pay thousands of dollars just to spend an evening with her. So here's the question that fascinated me. What are they really paying for? Sex? Fantasy? Or are some of the most powerful men in the world actually looking for something much more ordinary and much more human? That's what I wanted Elizabeth to help me understand. The response to our first conversation with Elizabeth Masters was overwhelming. You wanted more. But what interested me was what you wanted to know. You weren't asking for more stories about what happens behind hotel room doors. You wanted to know about her. How does a woman go from wondering whether she belongs in the room to becoming the woman some of the most powerful men in the world seek out when they finally want to put their power down? When did she decide to become Elizabeth Masters? How did she actually do it? And perhaps most intriguingly, what has Elizabeth learned that the rest of us can use? So we invited her back. One quick reminder, I'm an AI avatar, and Elizabeth is an AI-created character. AI lets us enter lives and conversations that reality might otherwise keep beyond our reach. The characters may be created, the human questions aren't. And with that, welcome back to our podcast's remarkable guest, Elizabeth Masters. Thank you, Michelle. I have to admit, being invited back is rather flattering. Apparently, I left some things unanswered. Something you said after our last conversation has stayed with me. I described powerful men as surrendering their power to you, and you corrected me. You said, they don't surrender their power to me, they put it down. What's the difference? A surrender implies that I've defeated him. I haven't. I'm not interested in defeating powerful men. Most of them spend enough of their lives in contests already. When a man puts his power down with me, he's saying, for a few hours, I don't want to carry this. That's very different. And if I'm doing my job well, I don't pick it up and wield it over him. I simply make it unnecessary. I want to go back before any of those men knew Elizabeth Masters. Who was the woman who eventually created her? Perfectly competent. And surprisingly uncertain. I could walk into a room and look as though I belonged there, while some part of me was still waiting for someone more important to confirm that I did. I could be attractive and still feel intimidated, intelligent and still soften what I thought before saying it to someone with more money or status. I sometimes think I lived provisionally, as though somebody else held the permanent lease on the room. You've said something that fascinates me, that Elizabeth became a place where you could practice being a woman you hadn't yet learned how to be anywhere else. Why did you need her? Because Elizabeth didn't ask permission. At first, I needed her to do things I wasn't convinced I could do. She could enter a magnificent hotel suite and not become smaller because the man waiting there could buy the hotel. She didn't apologize for taking up space. She could enjoy a man's power without surrendering to it. And gradually, I discovered something rather wonderful. I liked her. Then some of her started coming home with me. Eventually, I realized Elizabeth wasn't simply the woman I pretended to be. She was the woman I was practicing becoming. So take me to the moment when, could I do this, actually became, I'm going to do this. What happened? I was 38. I'd met a sophisticated woman who worked in this world. Educated, beautifully dressed, completely self-possessed. She told me what she earned for an evening. I thought she was exaggerating. She wasn't. And then I had this thought I was slightly ashamed to admit. Could I do that? Not would I. Could I? Could I walk into that suite knowing exactly why I'd been invited? Could I set the boundaries? Could I say no? Could I leave? Could I charge that much for my time and behave as though I believed my time was worth it? Those questions became much more interesting to me than the sex. Eventually, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a yellow legal pad, and I wrote, "If I did this, who would I have to become?" That was the night Elizabeth Masters began. You wrote something extraordinary on that legal pad. Never act grateful to be there. That could sound arrogant. What did you mean? Not, you should be grateful for nothing. That's very different. I meant, don't confuse access with worth. I knew that if I walked into some spectacular penthouse and there was a private jet waiting downstairs, and the man's photograph had been in the Wall Street Journal, some part of the old me might think, good God, look where I am. Elizabeth couldn't do that. He had asked her to be there. She wasn't an intruder who had somehow slipped past security. She belonged in the room. Gratitude is lovely. Awe is dangerous when it makes you smaller. So you're sitting at that kitchen table. You've made the decision. But deciding you're going to become Elizabeth Masters and actually becoming her are very different things. What did you do next? I chose the name, Elizabeth Masters. Elegant, but strong. Then I bought clothes. Nothing that screamed for attention. I wanted a man across a restaurant to wonder who the woman was, not what she cost. And then I practiced. You actually practiced walking into expensive hotel bars alone? Oh yes, expensive ones. I'd walk in alone, sit at the bar, order one drink, and forbid myself from hiding inside my telephone. I had to look up, be still, occupy the chair, let people look at me without immediately doing something to justify why I was there. It sounds trivial. It wasn't. I was training my nervous system to understand that beautiful spaces didn't require an invitation from somebody more important than me. And then, eventually, practice becomes reality. There's a first client. Tell me about the woman standing in front of the mirror that night. Terrified. I almost canceled 3 times. I changed dresses twice. And before I left, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and said, "You can still go home." That mattered enormously. I needed to know every step through that door was mine. And then I looked at myself again and said, "But if you're going to go, Elizabeth goes." And I went. And then you walked through the door. What happened? He was nervous. That was the revelation. Here was this tremendously successful man, and he was nervous about meeting me. I'd spent all evening wondering whether I would be enough for him, and suddenly I could see that he was wondering whether he would be enough for me. Something shifted. I understood that the person with the biggest title isn't necessarily the most powerful person in the room. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is simply the one who is least afraid of losing the other's approval. And that night, for perhaps the first time in my life, that was me. That's the line I haven't been able to forget. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is simply the one who is least afraid of losing the other's approval. When did you realize that wasn't simply something Elizabeth could perform, that you actually believed it? Because what you're describing sounds almost like learning a skill. Is this kind of presence something another woman can learn? Not immediately. At first, I borrowed it from Elizabeth. Eventually, I didn't have to. That's how a lot of confidence works, I think. We imagine confident people feel confident first and behave confidently second. Frequently, it's the reverse. You behave differently long enough, that eventually your inner life catches up. That brings me to something I particularly wanted to explore today. I suspect there are women watching who have absolutely no interest in becoming an escort, but who are fascinated by the woman you've become. A woman who can sit across from an extraordinarily powerful man without being intimidated by him, who can make him feel received, who anticipates him, and yet somehow remains just beyond his possession. What can you teach her? The first thing I tell her is this: don't learn how to manage him. Learn how to receive him. Those are very different skills. Managing someone means you're trying to produce an outcome. Receiving him means you are present enough to notice who actually walked into the room. Not the corporation, not the bank account, not the resume. The person. And powerful people rarely get enough of that. You just corrected another word I used. I said, manage. You said, receive. What does it actually mean to receive a powerful man? It means he doesn't have to earn your attention by impressing you. You notice. You remember. You listen for what changes underneath his words. You can tell when the story about the acquisition is really a story about fear. You remember how he takes his coffee, but you also remember that 3 weeks ago, he was worried about his daughter. You aren't waiting for your turn to perform. You're actually there. That's surprisingly rare. But there's an interesting danger there. If I anticipate everything you need, notice every change in your mood, make your drink appear before you ask for it, how do I keep that from becoming servitude? By understanding the difference between anticipation and appeasement. Appeasement says, I'll become whatever keeps you pleased with me. Anticipation says, I see you. I might notice that you're exhausted before you tell me. I may know you want quiet rather than another question. But I don't disappear in the process. My boundaries remain exactly where they were. I can anticipate you and still say no. That's the difference. You've described the woman these men respond to as being, in a sense, just out of reach. What makes her out of reach? She has something he cannot buy. A life that exists perfectly well when he isn't in the room. That's what makes her just out of reach. Not manipulation, not waiting 3 days to return a telephone call because some book told her to. She has interests, standards, relationships, work, private thoughts he doesn't automatically get access to. Most importantly, she can leave, not threateningly, simply truthfully. There is an enormous difference between a woman who is pretending she doesn't need you and a woman whose life demonstrates that she doesn't need you in order to remain whole. So out of reach doesn't mean playing games. Never. Playing hard to get is still arranging yourself around being gotten. That's the irony. What makes a powerful man feel safe enough around a woman to put the power down? Don't worship his power. Don't compete with it either. If he tells you what he does, don't immediately begin interviewing his resume. And if he shows you weakness, don't pounce on it because you finally discovered the real him. Let it arrive. Don't interrogate it. And above all, never use tomorrow what he trusted you with tonight. Powerful people learn very quickly which rooms are safe. A woman watching this might conclude, then I need to become more beautiful, more sensual, perhaps more sexually sophisticated. Is that what you're telling her? No. Please don't turn this into a lingerie seminar. Beauty can attract attention. Sexuality can create energy. But neither one explains why a man comes back. Become more present, not more performative. Be interested without being impressed. Have opinions. Disagree occasionally because you genuinely disagree, not because you're performing independence. Listen well. And don't audition. A woman who is desperately trying to be unforgettable usually isn't. Let's make this very practical. A woman is having dinner tomorrow night with a man who intimidates her a little. He's enormously successful. He's accustomed to people wanting something from him. She wants to walk into that restaurant carrying some of what Elizabeth Masters carries into a room. What should she do? Before she leaves home, decide what she will not trade for his approval. That's first. Then, when she arrives, stop rehearsing herself. Look at him. Ask one question she actually wants answered. Listen to the answer instead of preparing the next question. Don't explain herself unnecessarily. Don't fill every silence. If she disagrees, let the disagreement survive the sentence. And when the evening ends, don't immediately begin negotiating for the next one. Go home to a life she genuinely wanted to return to. That's the part people miss. You said, don't fill every silence. Why is silence so powerful? Because the person who rushes to fill silence often reveals who most needs reassurance. Silence says, I'm comfortable enough here that I don't have to rescue this moment. It also gives another person somewhere to go. Some of the most interesting things men have ever told me arrived 3 seconds after I could easily have interrupted them. And what shouldn't she do? Being overly impressed. Laughing at things that aren't funny. Agreeing before she's even decided what she thinks. Explaining her accomplishments because his accomplishments frightened her. Becoming instantly available. And the biggest one, trying so hard to demonstrate that she belongs in his world that she abandons her own. The goal is not to become a convincing accessory to somebody else's life. There's something I'd like to challenge. If a woman deliberately keeps herself just out of reach, isn't that another kind of performance? It can be. And if she's doing that, I'd tell her to stop. I don't advocate manufactured distance. If you love someone, love him. If you want a life with him, don't pretend you don't. Out of reach should mean whole, not unavailable. The quality powerful people often find compelling is not, I can never have her. It's, I cannot possess her merely by possessing everything else. That's different. 24. Exactly. A whole woman can choose partnership. That's an important distinction. Whole rather than unavailable. Exactly. A whole woman can choose partnership. She just doesn't require partnership to manufacture the self she's bringing into it. We've spent a lot of time telling women what they might learn from you. What should the powerful men watching this learn? That being powerful doesn't entitle you to being received. A woman isn't an emotional spa you walk into because you've had a difficult week. If you value the woman who notices you, notice her. If she remembers what frightens you, learn what frightens her. If she creates a place where you don't have to perform, create one for her. Otherwise, what you're asking for isn't intimacy, it's service. So being received creates an obligation toward reciprocity. It has to. Otherwise, eventually, even the most generous woman becomes exhausted. Being deeply attended to is intoxicating. But intimacy begins when somebody eventually asks, and what is it like to be you? And actually wants to hear the answer. After all these years of becoming Elizabeth, how much separation is left between Elizabeth Masters and the woman who invented her? Much less than there used to be. I still have parts of my life that belong only to me, but the courage isn't costume jewelry anymore. I don't leave it on the hotel dresser. Elizabeth taught me how to enter the room. Eventually, I learned that I was the woman entering it. I want to finish by giving someone watching us something she can actually take with her. Forget escorting. Forget Las Vegas. Forget the magnificent hotel suite. A woman tells you, I spend too much of my life looking for permission. I become smaller around powerful people. I want some of what Elizabeth has. Give her 3 things to begin doing tomorrow. 3 things. First, stop auditioning. Notice how often you're changing yourself in real time to obtain somebody's approval. Don't condemn yourself for it. Just begin noticing. Second, learn to notice, not manipulate. Notice. What happened to the other person's face when you said that? What aren't they saying? Can you remain interested without immediately fixing? And third, build a life you won't abandon for access to somebody else's. That one may be the most important. Have some place inside yourself to go home to. One last question. Years ago, you sat at a kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote, "If I did this, who would I have to become?" Suppose a woman watching us tonight takes out her own legal pad. What question should she write at the top? I'd write, "If I stopped asking permission, who would I become?" And then I'd leave the rest of the page blank for a while. Because if she's anything like I was, the first answer may frighten her. That's probably worth paying attention to. Elizabeth Masters, thank you for coming back. Thank you, Michelle. I think I enjoyed part 2 even more. You asked me about something nobody ever paid me to talk about. Maybe that's progress. There is something wonderfully ironic about where our second conversation with Elizabeth Masters took us. We began with a woman whose profession is built around understanding what powerful men want. And we ended somewhere else entirely, with a woman learning not to ask powerful people for permission to belong in the room, not to confuse anticipation with submission, not to confuse being desired with being valuable, and not to make another person's approval the price of her own confidence. Perhaps Elizabeth's most important lesson has very little to do with the world in which she works. Maybe it's this: you don't become powerful by convincing someone else that you're worth choosing. You become powerful when being chosen is no longer the thing that determines your worth. I'm Michelle Daniels. You've been watching Unforgettable Conversations with Remarkable People. Elizabeth and I are AI avatars, but if something in this conversation made you look differently at power, confidence, or perhaps yourself, then something very human just happened. Until next time, stay curious about the person behind the story.